In 2010, around 50,000 American minks were intentionally released from fur farms by animal rights activists. This happened in the Greek regions of Kastoria and Kazani, and the activists were sure they were doing the right thing. After all, what could be more right than saving animals from death? But they didn't consider the consequences of their actions. Most animals were captured or found dead shortly after release, but about 15,000 minks successfully adapted to the wild and then spread out in different directions. What did this lead to? It's not that hard to guess. But first, coffee. Today I found a lot of interesting stories, and I just have to share them with you. Here's an unobtrusive reminder to hit the like button if you forget to do it at the end of the video. So minks spread out and started actively reproducing, even in regions with endangered birds and other animals, which already had enough problems without new predators. Experts noted that another deliberate release like this could have devastating consequences for biodiversity and the preservation of vulnerable species. And sure enough, they released minks again. After animal rights activists released 50,000 minks, another 10,000 were set free the following year. Naturally, they continued what they started, expanding their territory and increasing their population. Wondering how American minks got to Greece in the first place? I answer, Greece is a major player in Europe's fur industry. They breed minks here, and then they make various pricey items from their fur. Minks were first brought to Europe from North America in the 1920s as fur animals. Right now, American minks are widely spread in the Baltic countries, France, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, Poland, Scandinavia, Spain, and the United Kingdom. And it's not because people wanted it. Minks were released. And then it all started. Sure, sometimes minks escape from farms, adding new problems to already existing ones and actually helping populations grow. For example, today, scientists are already looking into the possible expansion of the American minks range throughout Greece and even into nearby countries via river networks. In 2021, residents of Kazani called it an invasion. Minks appear daily on balconies and yards and in apartment building entrances in search of food. People can't even open their windows without the animals getting into their apartments. Not to mention the attacks on chicken coops, eating quail eggs faster than they can lay them, and showing up in hospital areas and more. As is often the case with invasive species, the American mink is an opportunist, meaning it'll eat anything it comes across and with a hearty appetite. Whether the prey is on land or in water, the mink will devour it. Such voracity naturally creates competition for food and habitat with local species. The mink can devastate entire colonies and populations of ground-nesting birds, including several species from the Anatidae and Rallidae families. Other affected species include reptiles and amphibians. Add here the transmission of diseases like plasmacytosis affecting economically important species of wild and domestic animals such as rock partridges or free-range chickens. Oh, and changes in food webs. Just a bit more, and American minks will start to seem like supervillains. And the cherry on top, these animals can be carriers of the coronavirus and transmit it to humans. So your cute, fluffy critter could infect you with COVID. Well, we now see the problems. There are plenty of them. But how do we fix the situation? Just like usual, right after the release of the animals, no one did anything special. Scientists, of course, described the scale of the disaster and all the potential outcomes, but that's it. The issue with minks in Greece remains largely unexplored. Nobody really is looking into it. In recent years, the situation has started to change a bit, and people have finally begun to think about some methods of combating it. So far, the ideas include removing minks by setting traps on rocky or densely overgrown river or lake banks near animal farms, but these are just plans. People are not panicking yet, which likely means that in a couple of years we'll hear about an invasion of American minks, and by then it'll be too late to stop it. Just so you know, in the UK, they've been battling invasive minks for a very long time, but even there, they think completely getting rid of these critters is just wishful thinking. However, when they finally decide to tackle the mink problem in Greece, there's a possibility they'll go for a less intense method of control. Not shooting in traps, but contraceptives. By the way, it's the newest method of population control for animals, currently being actively developed and even tested. For example, they plan to introduce a special chemical to wild boar males along with their food, which will prevent them from reproducing, thus reducing the population. Well, at least the animals won't spread as much across the territory. They're also developing special feeders that only work with boars so that no one except them accidentally stops reproducing. They're already using a similar approach with invasive gray squirrels in the UK. They add a chemical to peanut butter, put it in feeders, and as a result, the males and females become infertile. So as you understand, the biggest perk of this method is that there are no killing. Animal rights advocates should appreciate it. Honestly, I feel like I'm starting to be skeptical about the news of animal rights activists planning to release animals from somewhere. In 2019, for example, an article said an aquarium would soon open in New Jersey. Activists immediately reacted to this news and wanted to free the fish and rays planned to be kept there. All as usual, protests, signs. But as is often the case, such aquariums house far more than just local species. Therefore, any rescued animal means a risk of starting an invasive takeover. In Brazil, for instance, there's one of the largest invasions of invasive rays. These freshwater animals damage gear, pose risks of accidents, and of course cause serious economic losses to fishermen. In Indonesia, stingrays from South America might begin to pose a serious threat to local species. They've just begun discovering them in waterways, but the things don't look so great already, as it usually happens when a decorative critter ends up in the wild and realizes it's pretty comfy there. Same story in Singapore. Invasive stingrays, which used to be pets, are displacing local freshwater species, competing with them for resources, and generally acting downright rude. And in the USA, they already have banned invasive species of stingrays. Adding new ones? Well, that's definitely not what they need. There are enough problems already. What about fish? Take, for example, snakeheads. It seems we haven't mentioned them yet. This family of freshwater ray-finned fish and some species from this family have been introduced to North America. The first snakehead was caught in a small pond in Maryland in 2002, and since then it's sparked a wave of paranoia across the country and even led to the creation of 3 full-length horror movies. But the danger isn't that these fish might seem creepy to someone. They eat a damn lot, not caring about the size or type of their prey. Fish, reptiles, insects, anything goes. Local species have found it really tough to survive alongside such predators and with such competition. But it's not only about their appetite. Snakeheads also don't have natural predators in many areas where they've settled. They have no enemies, but they reproduce quickly. In just 2 years, one female can lay up to 150,000 eggs. And then both parents aggressively care for their offspring, which increases their chances of survival. Overall, the situation is pretty bad. There are already enough invasive fish. However, sometimes protecting certain species doesn't mean randomly releasing some animals. A telling story happened with the goats on Middle Percy Island. 12 goats were left there southeast of the city of Mackay in northern Queensland by the commander of the schooner Pearl in 1874. This happened during a cartographic expedition, and the plan was simple. Leave the goats as a future food source for sailors who might get shipwrecked in these waters. In short, from the commander's perspective, it was actually very nice. Over a century later, in 2011, the island was officially declared a national park, and local goat enthusiasts began to worry that the animals would be wiped out as feral pests. A petition was submitted to recognize the breed as a rare Australian one, and the petition was granted. Somewhere, dingoes, which no one agrees to call a separate species, let a disappointed sigh, but that's another story. There was no happy ending. Right now, there are more than 5.8 million feral goats in New South Wales alone. Actually, you can find them in all states and territories, including 25 islands in the Great Barrier Reef area, and they pose a threat to the survival of 128 endangered plant and animal species. Goats compete with native species for food, shelter, and water, while also trampling critical habitats, causing erosion. And now, environmentalists are worried that a herd of feral goats numbering over 500 is eating away the vegetation on Great Keppel Island to such an extent that, well, just take a look for yourself. Here there are no goats, and here they are. No need for further comments. Some ecologists are already calling for the complete removal of the goats from the island and comparing them to cockroaches because the goats are literally everywhere. Well, they're not hiding under sinks in the locals' kitchens, for now. And so in November 2023, the government unveiled a new plan to tackle the problem of wild goats, as it was time to deal with this invasive species. The plan suggests new methods, such as trying out new baits and also using drones and thermal cameras for culling from the air. Yes, no matter how much animal rights activists wanted to protect the goats in the early 2010s and hope for them to breed freely, things have gotten out of control. Today, feral goats are a serious problem for Australia, particularly for the Great Barrier Reef. They disrupt bird nesting areas, destroy them, And in the Blue Mountains, they graze so much that they damage fragile rocks. Also, being an invasive species, goats spread diseases and cost Australian communities and farmers significant expenses each year. Another issue is their reproduction. National parks are losing the battle against goats because each time efforts to eliminate them begin, funding runs out and the goats return and reproduce once more. It's a vicious cycle of active breeding and lack of funding, yet people continue to try. Actually, Australia really goes all out when it comes to fighting invasive species. There are even stats that say in 1,550 goat removal operations on 1,000 islands, they achieve an 88% success rate through hunting, trapping, and deliberate poisoning. If we leave the goats alone, they won't just destroy the wild nature, but also become a danger to people. Some goats practically live by the roadside and dash onto it at random moments. Say hi to possible accidents. In 2018, goats invaded the town of Castambul in South Australia, flooding parks and vineyards, munching through all the vegetation in their path. The damage they caused was estimated at hundreds of thousands of dollars. In that same year, 2018, the Kiosco Wild Horse Heritage Act was passed and came into effect. This happened in New South Wales, which is also in Australia. The uniqueness of the law was that it prioritized protecting introduced animals, domestic horses, over the local wild nature of the national park. This caused shock among scientists. The law was sharply criticized by many scientific figures, including the Australian Academy of Science. Essentially, this bill pits environmental advocates against animal rights defenders, even though you'd think they should work together. But no, it was passed without warning, consultations, or broad public support. The law just got passed, all in a couple of weeks. So it turns out that priority is given to harmful invasive species while the fragile ecosystems of the national park remain unprotected. Let me repeat to make it clear. There's a place set aside specifically for endangered species to feel comfortable and not go completely extinct, and in this place they suddenly decided to protect invasive horses. Don't get me wrong, I love horses. Horses are awesome, but it just seems unfair. Trying to protect them within Kosciuszko National Park using local plants and animals doesn't do anything for the species in Australia that are at risk of extinction. It seems especially odd considering how Australia deals with other invasive species. In the end, it happened just like it was supposed to. The laws of New South Wales protecting wild horses led to an increase in their population. All animal activists could suggest was passive trapping with subsequent relocation. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Hold on, how could horses possibly cause harm, someone might protest? Just like any other hoofed animals, I'd say to that. There's solid scientific evidence that wild horses damage delicate alpine and subalpine environments. Kosciuszko National Park forms part of the Australian Alps, part of the global network of biosphere reserves, and Australia's National Heritage List. It's a stunning place with a unique nature that simply wasn't prepared for horses to arrive. They trample and consume vegetation, erode waterways, and destroy habitats of rare species, such as the northern corroboree frog and stocky galaxious fish. Not on purpose, of course, but does this make things any better for anyone? Just look at these pictures. They were taken on purpose to show the kind of damage wild horses are causing to the park. All these trails, roll pits, big areas affected by grazing. That's definitely not what should be in a national park where there aren't supposed to be any horses at all. Yes, in case you didn't know or forgot, horses aren't native to Australia. They're descendants of escaped domestic horses brought by settlers. Basically, it's a classic invasive species story. But the thing is, it's not just that the horses are non-native and that's why they need to be removed. They make such a huge impact on the park's environment that they'll soon lead to the complete disappearance of 6 endangered animals and at least 2 plants. And they won't feel any guilt about it at all. Okay, here's some good news I just found out recently. In June 2024, the court rejected another application from the pro-horse group. They gave the green light for culling in the national park. Ecologists breathed a collective sigh of relief. The whole debate started when they talked about cutting down on the number of horses in the park, because in October 2023, they counted from 12,797 to 21,760 of them. It's tough to get an exact count of wild horses, you know? It was decided that the National Parks and Wildlife Service should reduce the population to 3,000 individuals by June 2027. Conservationists tried to challenge this, but the court sided with those who stand up for culling. And, well, common sense. However, years of debate and inaction have led to a rapid increase in the wild horse population. and the damage has already been done. The problem is much more pressing than before and requires much more decisive action. For now, they do look decisive. The plan is to maintain a wild horse population of 3,000 horses on 32% of the park's territory and eliminate all others by aerial shooting. Sure, it might sound awfully sad, but National Park staff carry out these vital tasks professionally, safely, and humanely, which is confirmed by multiple independent reviews. It may not sit well with everyone, and it probably doesn't, but culling performed by highly skilled experts is the only realistic way to decrease the population and protect the national park, as well as its local animals and plants, which are already too scarce. You owe me a like. See you later.